Sponsored by Experience Imagination. One way you can guarantee your survival in the business of cartoons is to understand the money side. So I thought I'd do a few episodes talking specifically about ROI or return on investment. And in this episode, I'm going to focus on the theatrical model. Hey there, welcome back to Surviving Animation, your guide to make it in the business of cartoons. My name's Eric Calderon. Today we're actually going to talk about theatrical animation and its ROI. But before I go further, I'd like to thank my sponsor, of course, which is Falcon's Creative Group and their award-winning podcast, Experience Imagination, a themed entertainment podcast. This latest episode actually features Falcon's founder and CEO, Cecil D. Magpuri, who's the reason I actually joined Falcons, and the legendary Mike Hightower, the recently retired president of Universal Creative, the division that designs, develops, and delivers Universal's attractions and resorts around the globe. So Cecil and Mike take a deep dive into the psychology of attractions, and it's kind of hard to imagine two more experienced experts on the subject. So give it a listen, hear all the anecdotes and wisdom bombs that they drop. It's a real good one. I think you'll enjoy. All right, let's get back to the ROI of animated films. To start this discussion, we need to create a simple definition of ROI or a formula that we can use to kind of determine how well a film or an investment has done. In this specific case, I'm going to use net revenue minus total animation costs divided by the total animation cost times 100. That formula gives a basic percentage that hopefully will be a positive number, and the higher the better. As we talk about this ROI, at the end I'll also go into the important factor of time, which is how long it takes for an investment to return to the people who put money in. And to help things go along, I'll actually use two films as I describe this formula to give you a concrete example of something that's actually just recently happened. I'm going to discuss Inside Out 2, which actually garnished $1.6 billion in total box office against a $200 million budget, and Transformers 1, which has gathered to date about $97 million worldwide against a $75 million budget. But since it's still in the theaters, I'm going to actually add about $23 million to account for its total run over time. So we'll say that the full estimated gross of Transformers 1 for the purposes of this video is $120 million. Now, as I go through both these examples and describe the formula and help you understand how ROI works, I'm going to kind of surprise you at the end and tell you why I think Transformers is the winner. Okay, let's start to define our net revenue number. We begin first with that big exciting number that you see in the variety magazines and the Hollywood Reporters, which is the total number of ticket sales coming in. What is first removed from that gross number is what we call gross participation, or when something like a producer or a director or a Hollywood talent is able to negotiate a deal where they receive a percentage of the first dollar that comes in. This term is often called first dollar gross. There are some cases in which actors and directors and producers were so powerful or so influential or so essential to the film that they were able to command something like 15 or 20% off the initial gross box office that goes right into their pockets. In our case here, we have Pixar, we have Amy Poehler, we have Hasbro, we have Chris Hemsworth. So there are some pretty heavy hitters in our two examples. So I'll use 10% as the number of our first participation gross. Okay, let's get down to calculating our running net. In the case of Inside Out, 10% of $1.6 billion is $160 million, making the new net revenue $1.44 billion. In the case of Transformers, 10% of $120 million is $12 million, making our new net revenue $108 million. Now that we've had the gross participation shaved off, we get down to the next big participant, which is the theaters themselves. Now, typically, theaters take 40% of the remaining gross after the first gross participation is removed as their share to actually put the movie in the theaters. Now, this number is a generalization, so in some territories like Europe, it can go down as low as 25%. It can actually go as high as 60%. And in a lot of cases, it also is a sliding scale. So we can start at 40, go higher as the movie stays in the theater longer. And that is a case-by-case negotiation of the film and the theaters and a lot of other factors. But for the purpose of this discussion, we'll use 40% as the industry standard theater participation. So here's what happens to our new running nets. In the case of Inside Out, 40% of $1.44 billion is $576 million, making the running net $864 million. In the case of Transformers, 40% of 108 million is 43.2 million, making the new running net 64.8 million. All right, aside from any kind of tricky Hollywood accounting or flat out fraud or all the other things you hear about Hollywood accounting, let's just say that that's our official net revenue for this discussion. So now let's get into the total animation costs. And we begin, like I said before, with Inside Out being $200 million as its reported budget and $75 million as Transformers' reported budget. But if you think about the total animation cost, one really important factor you have to consider is how much marketing is put into getting these films out and aware into the audiences who eventually will want to see it. Traditionally, the marketing number that was used was 30% of the production budget, but times have really changed. So if you look at even a movie like Super Mario Brothers, which was reported to have a budget of $100 million, they spent $150 million on the actual marketing of it. Additionally, I like to always talk about Five Nights at Freddy, which is a big success, and people are so excited that it only cost $20 million to make, but actually $60 million was spent on the theatrical marketing of that film. With this higher percentage of marketing in mind generally, and if I think about how much both of these films spent in special events and traditional advertising and all the things they did to try to get people excited about these films, I would kind of roughly say they spent about 60% of their budget on marketing. So how does this affect the total animation cost if you add in the marketing to that? In the case of Inside Out, an additional 60% on top of the $200 million puts the animation cost for Inside Out to $320 million. In the case of Transformers, adding 60% on top of its current production cost puts that $75 million up to $120 million. One thing that's worth mentioning on both these films is that they were both made stateside, so neither of them benefited from any kind of tax incentive or subsidy that is typically associated with animation produced in places like Canada, like Ireland, and like Australia. So these are straight animation costs, no help from the government. Okay, we're finally ready to calculate our new ROI based on all the assumptions I made before. In the case of Inside Out 2, its net revenue of $864 million minus its new total animation cost of $320 million divided by the animation cost of $320 million gives us an ROI of 170%. In the case of Transformers, our new net revenue of $64.8 million is subtracted by its total animation cost of $120 million divided by its animation cost of $120 million times 100 gives us an ROI of negative 46%. Now that we understand the simple ROI, it might be easy to assume that Inside Out 2 is the winner. And in many cases, it really is. So for the short term, in terms of optics, it really is seen as one of the most successful films of all time. It got all the headlines, while conversely, Transformers got kind of a middle response, especially from the press. It was seen as kind of a mishit. It didn't do well as people thought, kind of a disappointment. But this analysis, I feel, is kind of incomplete because the real ROI is over time. And if you think about how traditional film studios do their financing and when they expect their money back, it's really more like 5 to 7 years. In both Inside Out and Transformers cases, these theatrical windows are really only the first 4 to 8 weeks of that film's lifespan. From here, they'll actually go into syndication, which means they'll go to a streaming network, which means they'll go to a cable network, which means they'll go to other streaming networks after the initial streaming window is done. And then they'll go to things like even terrestrial and local television stations and home video as well. And after that full 5 to 7 year run, you'll kind of see the full impact of the ROI as they earn little bits of money along the syndication chain. So even with that said, I'm sure that Inside Out 2 will probably garnish more total funds than Transformers in its run. But here's the thing. Transformers is a good movie as well. And I'm not just saying that subjectively from my personal opinion. I'm talking about its Rotten Tomatoes score of 98%. So if you think about it from Hasbro's specifically perspective, this is really a major franchise that they're looking to reinvigorate. So Transformers has to be a huge part of their already gigantic portfolio. And if you look at Hasbro's numbers, they do something like $1 to $1.3 billion of sales every quarter on their toys. And you better believe that Transformers is a big part of it. So even though time and actual sales numbers will probably reveal the truth over the next few years, what you can believe about Transformers is they don't necessarily view it as a loss as a film. In a way, it's really a $55 million marketing cost against launching a brand new franchise. So this means that Hasbro took this loss. Of course, they didn't want to, but they did, in order to get this 1 hour and 44 minutes of incredible storytelling, new lore, new design to characters into the hearts and minds of fans. And what happens when you put that into fans? They carry that as they watch it, as they rewatch it, as they refer it to other friends, as it really sinks into their heart. I think the true ROI becomes apparent in the fandom they've created. Okay, that's all I got for you. I know I started with a strict definition of ROI, but in the end kind of became more of a creative raha for why films, even at a loss, can actually help fandom, and the real ROI being the benefit of the lifetime of fans they give. But that's just how I see things. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it wasn't too light or too heavy, and I will be doing more episodes that talk about the ROI in terms of SVOD series, in terms of kids animation series, sometimes consumer products driven, sometimes just pure entertainment. I'll go a little bit in adult animation, and I'll also talk about AVOD, or how ROI works on YouTube. I hope you look forward to it. I look forward to making it. It takes a lot of research to do these, and I get really excited about it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.